For those students who were in my finite element class and did not take the continuum exam last Wednesday, so for them, the test is at 4:30 p.m. today in 333 Norris. So I guess, Jessica, you know where the room is, right? And I think you know that room, right? You know where Norris Hall is?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's on the third floor. So you will find it's outside says 333. So if you go in, there is A, B, C, D, E, and you will find it. Okay, so I guess I don't see Wake Forest people. No, I see Mr. Cook.
Do you see us now?
Pardon me?
We changed the view. Can you see us now?
Yeah, I can see you now. Yeah, okay. Okay, I can see you now, yes. Good, thank you. Okay, so I will return your exam on Wednesday. And this is the homework due next week. Okay, any question you want to ask? Hey, the rule of the game is you are supposed to be silent and I'm supposed to be talking starting at 11:15. Now it is 11:16. So, any question you have? If none, yes?
Sorry, Professor. Just one question about the compatibility equation when we got it.
Right.
It was about the domain. In any case, is it right to put a restriction about the domain? Because we should get a, if I well remember...
Usually it's in a simply connected domain.
Ah, perfect. Okay. Okay.
But okay, so I'm switching gears and going to the next chapter called kinetics. So what we are going to study now is how the forces are related to the motion. Still, the material of the body will not come into picture. So whatever we will study for the next couple of weeks, like this week and the next week, is independent of the material. We are not going to say what is the material of the body. So far we have not said that. Okay, so now the question is, who will tell me what is Newton's first law of motion? Newton's, how many of you have heard of Isaac Newton? So what is Newton's first law of motion? In what context did you hear about Newton? Basically, Newton's laws of motion. Right? Or Newtonian fluid. So we are not going to talk about the fluid part yet, but let's talk about the laws of motion. So you took, I think all of you took dynamics, right? Particle dynamics. You did not? You are kidding me. So what's your major?
In undergrad, it was electrical.
Oh, electricals are not required to take dynamics. Yeah. And also electricals are not required to take statics even.
Not just that.
No, but that you took probably as an elective. Okay, so accept you now. I mean, you are an exception. But anybody else who has not taken dynamics? So when you took dynamics, you must have used Newton's laws of motion, right? How many laws are there? How many Newton's laws are there?
3.
3, good. At least you know the number. So what is the first law then? if there are three, there must be first, second, and third.
Is the first one that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, or is that number 2?
Well, that's number 3. So this is good. At least, I mean, you said, she described number 3 now. That's like, to every action, there is equal and opposite reaction. But to go to 3, so we have to go to first 1, and then 2, and then third we already know now. I think he's going to tell us first here.
An object in motion stays or in motion unless acted upon by an outside force or
Okay, something like that. Anybody else wants to define that? A free body, first of all, a free body is one on which there is no force acting. Of course, we cannot, to have a free body, you have to go into space. On Earth, there is no free body. So if you can imagine yourself to be in Columbia or some other spacecraft and orbiting maybe 10-20 miles away from the Earth, then you are more or less a free object. So Newton's first law of motion says that a free body continues in its state of rest or of uniform motion. It's uniform motion, which means the velocity stays constant and its direction does not change. Velocity is a vector, so both its magnitude and direction do not change. So that basically defines an inertial frame of reference. So a frame of reference in which a free body either stays at rest or continues to move with a uniform velocity gives us that inertial frame. So from now onwards, we are going to use inertial frame. Technically, the inertial frame should be attached to the sun, S-U-N, not S-O-N. It's the planet, sun, that supplies us heat. So but in real life, unless you are designing a space shuttle or you are designing objects moving at high speed, we take the inertial frame to be the one attached to the ground. So for all engineering purposes, we make this approximation. It's an approximation. It's not quite valid, but for designing engineering structures, that's okay. If you are designing a bridge or a car or even an airplane, it's okay. Because airplanes don't fly, or they don't move at the speed of light. At least not yet. But if something is moving really very fast, if you are designing, say, Space Columbia, then you cannot take the inertial frame or you cannot neglect the rotation of the Earth. Otherwise, it will never reach the destination. If you are designing something to go to the Mars, then you have to account for the rotation of the Earth. But if you are designing a golf ball, it doesn't matter. You don't have to take into account the rotation of the Earth. So first of all, Newton's first law of motion basically defines an inertial frame of reference. That's the only purpose we will have for the first law of motion. So now we already know the third law. She defined for us, to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So what is the second law then?
F equals ma.
F equals ma. Good. How else can we say the same thing? Have you heard of linear momentum? What is linear momentum equal to? You must have, if you did dynamics, you must have heard linear momentum. There is no way out. You studied collision of bodies. When the two particles collide, right? So what is linear momentum? Is it a scalar or a vector quantity? Is linear momentum a scalar or a vector quantity? Francis?
It should be a vector quantity.
Should be a vector. It is a vector quantity. Not should be, it is a vector quantity. So now the next thing is, what is it equal to? Good. So it's mass times velocity. So now we need to define Newton's second law of motion that Katie gave us correctly in terms of linear momentum. Like she said, force equals mass times acceleration, which is correct. Now, how will we say it in terms of linear momentum? Yes?
The time rate of change.
Yeah, the time rate of change of linear momentum equals the resultant force acting on it. See, the double E guy who said he did not take dynamics is giving us the definition of Newton's second law of motion. It's good, right? So okay, so now we need to take that to the continuum level. So this was for the particle. So we are going to translate that to the continuum level. Also, when Katie said force equals mass times acceleration, or he said rate of change of linear momentum equals the force, we are talking about at this moment. We are not talking about 10 years ago. So the present force equals the present rate of change of linear momentum. The force acting on the body now, the resultant force acting on the body now equals the present, the current, the rate of change of linear momentum. So we have this, our body, which we of course draw as a potato, but now we are in the present configuration. So we are in the present shape of the body. And we want to write the rate of change of linear momentum equals the resultant force acting on it. So we take the rest of the experiment is virtual, in imagination now. So you are not going to really cut the body. You imagine this small piece. So this small piece has volume dV. Now I have to be careful. I am going to use V for velocity and dV for volume. Okay. So what will be the mass of this chunk of material? This volume is dV in the present configuration. So what will be its mass? Multiply with the mass density, which we denote by the Greek symbol rho, and that's more or less universally accepted. So this is Greek symbol rho. Actually, if you study medicine, they use a lot more Greek words than we do. I mean, we only use symbols, but they use really Greek words. Okay, so we have the mass now of this material. So to get the linear momentum, means one of you told us it should be multiplied with the velocity. So we multiply it with, say, velocity v, and that underneath the tilde indicates as a vector. And if I want to find the linear momentum of the entire body, so I integrate it. So let's say this chunk of material we have, this part we are talking about is, we denote by P. P is the part of the body. Okay, it's the entire shaded portion. So P you can think of as a particle. It's not one particle though, right? Okay, so we integrate this over P. And its rate of change of linear momentum, so that's d over dt. It's capital D over dt. It's like keeping the particles fixed. Now we are looking at this chunk of material. In imagination, you can imagine that you have taken a hacksaw or a saw and you have cut out this material. You have shaded the boundaries or you have colored the boundaries. You know, Halloween is coming, so you have colored these boundaries with some red color or whatever color you like, and then you have put it back into the body. So we are going to look at this chunk of material all the time. Only this chunk of material, which is arbitrarily chosen. And now we need to find forces, because the rate of change of linear momentum equals the resultant force acting on it. Now in continuum mechanics, in classical continuum mechanics, that means it was founded something like 200 years ago. We are not covering the material that was proposed 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 50 years ago. It's 200 years ago. So that's why the course is called Introduction to Continuum Mechanics. It's not called like modern continuum mechanics. Okay, so what we are studying is 200-year-old stuff, at least 200 years old. Okay, so in classical continuum mechanics, we consider two forces, two kinds of forces. One is gravity, which is everywhere present. And so what will be the gravitational force acting on this chunk of material? What will be the gravitational force acting on this piece of material, the one we have shaded?
Mass into acceleration due to gravity.
Mass into acceleration due to gravity. Good. So the mass is rho dv. Acceleration due to gravity, let's call it say b. And we integrate this. So B is the body force per unit mass. Gravity is the force per unit mass. So B is the body force per unit mass. So B is standing for body. Yeah. So it's the body force per unit mass. So far so good. The continuum mechanics part comes into picture in the following sense. We assume, it's a hypothesis or it's a postulate, and this assumption has been verified with experiments. Okay, so we assume that if you take this chunk of material, which I said you take in imagination, you cut it and then put it back, like you have colored it and then put it back. So the part which is not shaded, that means a part 1, exerts a force on part 2. So the action of part 1, the action of unshaded material on the shaded one is equipolant. That's a technical term. So it's equipolant is equivalent to a system of forces distributed over the contact surface. Okay, so it's like for any two of you, since no two of you are touching with each other, so this force is 0. So this force comes into action only when something is touching it. So in this case, part 1 is touching part 2. If there were a gap between part 1 and part 2, this force will be 0. So this force is coming into picture because the two bodies are touching each other. They are in contact with each other. So this is called contact force. So you can think of two football players. If they contact with each other, then there's a contact force. Otherwise, this force is not there. Also, this force is measured per unit surface area. Okay, so it's a force per unit surface area, not force per unit volume. B was the force per unit mass. But this one is force per unit surface area, and the force is a vector. And dA, we have chosen the surface, so we know what we are talking about. So this is on the boundaries. So you, at every point on the contact surface, see, at every point on the contact surface, you look at a small area element, then the action of 1 on 2 is equivalent to a system of forces. But they don't have to be compressive all the time, they can be tensile too. But it's equivalent to a system of forces, not forces and moments. That's where the classical continuum mechanics comes into picture. Okay, so we are not assuming any rotational degrees of freedom. There are no distributed moments. Even though in mechanics of deformed class we teach you distributed moments, like in the bending of beam problem we say there's a moment applied. But in continuum mechanics there are no point moments applied. So there are really no point loads even. The forces are distributed over an area. So the net force at a point is F times dA, where F is the force per unit area and dA is the surface area element. And if you do this over all the boundaries, you will get the total force. So we have a contact force, and we have a non-contact force. So the gravity is always there, whether you are touching the earth or not. But if you are like several miles away from the ground, then the gravity force basically vanishes. And the contact force comes into picture only when the two bodies are touching each other or contacting each other. But the key assumption is that part 1, the action of part 1 on part 2 is equivalent to a system of forces distributed over the contact surface. Not forces and moments, just forces. So whatever moments we will consider, they are caused by forces. There are no point moments in the body. That's where the classical assumption comes into picture. That's why we are calling it classical continuum mechanics. When I realize if you have electromagnetic field, you might be able to create point moments. But that's not what we are studying now. There are no point moments acting on the body. Okay, now, so if we draw this picture, this is the part P that we are looking at, and supposing I'm at one point. So I'm at this point here. And at this point, supposing this is the outward normal n, outward unit normal n, the Cauchy proposed, again, you will hear the word Cauchy a lot. So what Cauchy said, so now we are going away from Newton and we will be basically using what Cauchy proposed. For whatever we are going to study today and maybe on Wednesday is due to Cauchy. So what he said was that the contact force per unit area, which means this F, depends upon the orientation of the surface only through the outward normal. So if I take this surface here, or the surface I drew in blue color, or if I take this surface which I am drawing in green color, or I take this surface which is flat, then the force per unit area is the same. So this is Cauchy's postulate, which is a fancy word for assumption or a hypothesis, that the contact force per unit area, it depends upon the orientation of the surface only through the outward normal. Now with a normal you cannot define the surface uniquely, because I just showed you 4 surfaces that pass through the same point, have the same outward normal, but they are different surfaces. So there are really infinitely many surfaces that have the same outward normal passing through a point. So to define the surface uniquely, you really need more than the outward normal. You need the curvature and maybe higher order curvatures. So it depends how far you want to define it. Okay? But Cauchy said, all you really need to know is the outward normal. And incidentally, all of you made that assumption in fluid mechanics. If you took a course in fluids, if you took a course in mechanics of deforms, you made the same assumption, even though we did not tell you that way. Okay? You will see soon. We did not say that we are adopting Cauchy's postulate, but you did adopt Cauchy's postulate. Okay, so this F then, it depends upon the orientation of the surface only through the outward normal. So I'm going to rewrite this thing here, d over dt of rho dv v on part P equals rho dv body force on part P plus F x and dA. And this is on the boundaries. So it depends upon the orientation of the surface only through the outward normal. Okay? So what I need to show you now is that d over dt of rho v dv equals rho v dot dv. So I need to show you this. Is this equal? So that's how we will simplify the left hand side. And that's what Katie said, mass times acceleration. So that will show up now. Rho times dv is mass. Excuse me. And v dot is acceleration. So it will become mass times acceleration. So to prove that, now remember, P is a function of time. We are in the present configuration. it said present configuration. So the present configuration can keep on changing with time. So I cannot simply take d over dt inside the integral sign because my limits of integration are not fixed. My limits of integration are not fixed. So to prove this, in order to prove this, we are going to prove a more general result. So we are going to prove this. So if I set phi equal to v, then I will get my result I want. Okay? So if I set phi equal to velocity, then I will get the result we are trying to get. So here phi can be anything. It's any function of space and time. So to prove this, I change the variable of integration. So I change the variable of integration from little x's to big x's. I mean, that's okay, right? So we know little x is a function of big X. And you can invert this relation, so big X is a function of little x and time. So what is the relationship between little dv and big dv? What is the relationship between little dv and big dv? Yeah, Jacobian. So j times big dv. Good. So I have d over dt of rho phi dv on part p. So we change the variable of integration. So wherever we see little x, we substitute this expression. Okay? So that's what we are doing now. We are substituting little x in terms of big X, and the only way you see it is that little dv is now j times big dv. And now my limits of integration are fixed because big X is fixed in time. There is no, unlike, I mean, my name doesn't change whether I move from here to Norris Hall. So big X is fixed. Therefore, you can take the differentiation with respect to time inside the integral sign now. You can take the differentiation inside the integral sign. But before I do that, what is rho j? Rho naught. That's mass density in the reference configuration. That is mass density in the reference configuration. So I get P rho 0, it's d over dt of rho 0 phi dv. because rho j equals rho 0. And that one equals rho 0 d phi over dt dv part P. Because rho 0 doesn't change with time. KT, you are not happy. See, we derived that rho j equals rho 0. It's in your notes. I mean, or should be in your notes. Rho 0 mass density does not change in the reference configuration. It's not a function of time. So now we do the reverse transformation, go from the reference configuration to the present configuration. So we get the variables, we change it. This is rho 0, this is phi dot, and dv is little dv over j, but then rho 0 over j is rho
We can get the result directly by mass conservation, right?
Yes, that's what we have used that. When we said rho j equal to rho 0, we use the conservation of mass. We use the conservation of mass when we said rho j equal to rho 0. Okay, so if I set phi equal to velocity, then we get this result. So if we set phi equal to little v, I mean, if you like, you can set phi equal to vx. Then next time you set phi equal to vy. Third time you can set phi equal to vz, and you get that result. Is it okay? So we can replace this quantity by that. So we can say then that rho v dot dv on part P equals rho b dv on part P plus f of x and dA on part P. So that's our equivalent of Newton's second law of motion. But we will call it Cauchy's law of motion because Cauchy gave it for a continuum. And the contribution from Cauchy is, among other things, that this contact force is a function of the orientation of the surface only through the outward normal. Okay? So what I'm really getting at, what I'm driving or what I'm trying to drive is a stress tensor. All of you have heard, or I'm sure you have heard, possibly except for you maybe, you have heard sigma xx, sigma xy, sigma xz, sigma yy, sigma yx, sigma yz, etc., right? And you have heard that they should be symmetric. So that's where we are getting at. Yeah? So that's our goal. Okay, now, so when we said that this part P that we take inside the body, now we take it a special shape. It can be any arbitrary shape. And now I choose a pillbox in which you have like aspirin or Tylenol or something like that. So it's a pillbox. So it looks like this. So that's my part P. And this pillbox has height epsilon. That's why I call it a pillbox. Otherwise, I would have called it a cylinder, because its height is tiny. And it has a radius r. So this is 2r, is the diameter. We are in the present configuration. Okay? So if we want to apply this Cauchy's law of motion, we cannot call it Cauchy's second law of motion, because this is only one or a continuum. So we want to apply this Cauchy's law of motion to this pillbox. How many of you have heard of something called mean value theorem in calculus? Good. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what is the mean value theorem? All of you should have, I'm sure all of you have come across it. This is, I think in freshman calculus you were taught. If not in high school, I think in freshman. So what is the mean value theorem? I think you just defended your MS thesis, so maybe you should tell us. Actually, I know you know the answer.
I don't know if my message was on the mean value there, but the slope between two endpoints on a function is equal to the derivative of that function between those 2 points at least one place.
That's not mean value theorem.
Then I have the wrong definition of one.
Okay. So who will tell us then what is the mean value? Jessica's getting ready to say.
I don't remember.
So does anybody remember? I think some of you said you know it. So what is this mean value theorem? What is this integral equal to?
No.
Okay, I can give you a hint. It is b minus a times something.
Yeah, probably, Professor, is the derivative of the function
That's
f.
what he said. It's a derivative. And I said no. I think that's what he said. It's a derivative. Pardon me? Of course, that's something, right? See, if you look at the units, it cannot be derivative because this is f, you are multiplying with length. So this is length. So whatever I have to multiply with this should have the same units as f has. It's the value of f at some point in the interval a to b. Either it could be end point or say mean value, mean, M-E-A-N. That means average. So there is some point zeta. There is some point zeta between A and B. It could be one of the endpoints also. The mean value theorem says that there exists a point zeta on the interval A to B such that this is true. Oh. Is it okay? I mean, does it refresh your memory or not? So if it does, so let's apply that. So let's apply the mean value theorem. I think if you have a question, you should ask me. So let's apply the mean value theorem to this equation. So according to the mean value theorem then, what is the left hand side equal to? My f now is this quantity. The function we are trying to integrate is rho v dot. So what it says is you evaluate rho v dot. I cannot tell you which point in this pillbox. There is a point in the pillbox. So let me put that point star. There is a point in the pillbox where I evaluate this function, and then I multiply it by the volume of the pillbox. That's pi r square epsilon. We evaluated the function f at some point, multiplied by the length of the interval. In this case, it's the volume integral. On the right hand side, again we evaluate rho b at some point. Again, we do not know the point. The mean value theorem does not tell you the exact location of the point. All it tells you is there is a point. There exists a point. So since I don't know it, let me put 2 stars on it. That point could be different from the previous one. So we get, again, volume pi r square epsilon plus, this is Cauchy's original argument of 200 years ago. So nothing new. And Cauchy was very lucky. The French king basically gave him a room and money. They will provide him with the living expenses, and you do whatever you want. Do research, whatever research you want. Once in a while, of course, the king will ask him, I want to invade, say, country A. Don't tell me what is the best way to go from my place to send my forces to country A. How can I win? But other than that, you take whatever you want and do whatever you want. No strings attached. You don't have to write a project report. You don't have to go to annual review. Nothing. And you don't have to work on this problem either. Okay, so now let's evaluate the second term then. The second term says on the boundaries. So what are the boundaries of this pillbox? So the pillbox, there is a side surface, lateral surface, there's a top surface, and there's a bottom surface. So let's assume the normal on the top surface is n. So we will get f, some point on the top surface. So let's put triple star, since we are going to run out of stars, so let's put a bar. So this is a point on the outer surface, on the top surface, and it will be multiplied with area, so that's pi r square, plus, this is f, plus a point on the bottom surface, so it's a double bar, because I don't know which point it is. Again, mean value theorem. It's mean value theorem. Plus, now we are on the boundaries. So there's another point on the lateral surface, say hat, and this is, and it keeps on changing on the outer surface. And the outer surface area is 2 pi r epsilon. Is it making sense? We are using the mean value theorem. So now we have used the mean value theorem, and we say, okay, let epsilon go to 0. Let the height of the pillbox go to 0. So what will happen when the height of the pillbox goes to 0? So we are going to assume that none of these quantities, when the height goes to 0, none of these quantities becomes infinity, which is a reasonable assumption. Rho v dot, that's linear momentum per unit volume, that's not going to blow up. Body force is not going to blow up. Blow up means go to infinity. So then if epsilon goes to 0, what we get then is f of x n. Actually, here I had made a mistake, because if the normal to the outer surface is n, normal to the lower surface will be minus n. So I should put minus n here. Plus, well, this was bar, this is double bar. Pi r square equal to 0. See, epsilon goes to 0, then the terms which are multiplying epsilon they vanish. And now I say, okay, I can divide by r square, which is what we do typically in calculus. And now I say, okay, let this pillbox, we have already made its height 0, and now we make its radius 0. So we shrink it to a point. And if you shrink it to a point, then x bar and x double bar will become the same thing. So what we really have is a thin sheet of paper, you can say, and it's basically a point now, because we have shrunk the radius to 0, the height to 0. So we have, at one point, we have two surfaces, the normal pointing up and the normal pointing down. So what we get then is that f x n minus of this equals f x minus n. So the term in the brackets is 0, so I can take this to the other side. And now, once I say the next line, then I will quit. So this is f of x minus n. So this is what somebody from Wake Forest just told us in the beginning, more or less. So this is, what it says is that if you change the orientation of the surface, if you make n equal to minus n, then the force becomes negative. So it's the same thing as saying action and reaction are equal and opposite. But this is proved rather than making an assumption. So what it says is that f is an odd function of n. F is an odd function of n. And I assume you know what is odd and what is even. Odd means if you change the sign of n, then the sign of the function changes. So f of x equal to x cube, x to the power 5, or sin x are odd functions of x. Whereas f of x equal to x square, x to the power 4, or cosine of x are even functions of x. So remember now, next time I will ask you, because we are going to use this result, f is an odd function of n. Okay? So we are going to use this last result next time. Okay, so we will stop here and then continue on Wednesday. Now, before we discuss, one thing more. When can we make up classes? How many of you, or what time are you free on Tuesdays and Thursdays? Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we already meet on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So it's not a great idea to meet again on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So Tuesday, Thursday, like 4 o'clock. Does that work for you? From 4 to 5?
I teach a lab from 4 that goes until 5 o'clock. That is no guarantee.
Okay, what about 5 to 6? You have a class. 3 to 4?
We may need to check to see when our classroom is open here,
Okay.
because we're not sure if we can record a class even, if this classroom's being used, and we're not sure what the schedule is.
No, recording is not problem. I can record it here and then you can watch it on the internet. Because you have
Okay.
the web page. So all the lectures are being taped and they will be on the internet. So in case one or two of you misses a lecture,
Okay.
but the problem is if the same person misses every time, then it's not fair. How about Saturdays? Will Saturday work for any one of you? No chance?
Could you record them like separately on your own and you could watch it?
No, because then there is no interaction.
Is it possible to find time where we're all free?
Well, if a majority of you are free. I agree with you, Josh, that we cannot find a time when all of you are free. But if majority of you are free, I can make it. So, okay, on Tuesday, Thursday, 4 o'clock, you said you cannot make it. How many of you can make it? Okay. So let me see if this classroom is available, or another classroom with the TV, with the recording equipment is available. Then we can meet there. No, not for tomorrow. No, I will let you know beforehand.